make a recommendation at the end of the meeting. May I sign the minutes of the previous? Say yes, Simon. Do we have apologies?
Apologies received from councillors Nick Bunting, Colin Morgan and Sean Connors, Chairman.
Ron Connors, sorry, Nick Bunting. And who's that?
Colin Morgan.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Right, do we have any declaration of interest? No, not. KPMG annual report. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Would you like us to? Well, we'll do it together. But
I mean, these reports get thinner and thinner. Actually, it's probably good. Isn't it?
It is good. I mean, it has to be seen in conjunction with the subsequent one on the accounts.
Yes.
I mean, you know, if you like, the meat of the agenda is the accounts, and our report is one commentary on it. You know, you're also, you know, are asked to take a view, and there's a letter of representation and so on that we'll come on to. We're happy to present our report first and explain what we've done. I thought, you know, happy to amend, but I thought go through it page by page and try and explain, and happy to take any questions that people have as we go.
Yeah.
This is our most, you know, the most important report that we do.
Could we have introductions? I don't know who's speaking on this.
I'm sorry, each end from KPMG. The district auditor outsourced the audit functions to KPMG a couple of years ago. Three years ago. Three years ago. And the district, these are external auditors who present this report, and their comments obviously are borne in mind when we come to undertaking various statutory jobs that we have to do in the course of the evening. So they have been working throughout. You don't just visit once a year.
No, it comes to a sort of shuddering climax at this time of the year, but it is an all the way year-round job.
Yeah. I'm
John Gorry. I'm a director from KPMG, and Adrian is on the audit team. And more than happy to sort of, if there's any questions as we go, because, you know, some of it may be more or less familiar to members. So I wanted to start on page 2 with the introduction. So what this report is trying to do is it's summarising our key findings from the work of the audit, and that has 2 elements. So one element is focusing on the accounts, which is, as I say, the item that's next on the agenda. And the other element is that we have an opinion on value for money. It's called the value for money conclusion. So I'll be talking about both of those. The next bit talks about the different stages of our work, and as Chairman said, it is an ongoing process, and where we've come to is the substantive procedures and completion stage. What I would like to sort of say in summary is that this has been, you know, an ongoing process of trying to make the audit smoother and more efficient. And the audit processes, the production of the accounts by the authority has been brought forward and done earlier, and we have also done the audit earlier. So if you like, there's an ongoing process of trying to make it earlier and smoother. And that is also going to be building towards deadlines being brought forward that we're required to work to, that are going to come through in a couple of years. So it's all about bringing the work forward closer to the time after the year end when the accounts are produced. The report covers a number of different sections. I'm going to talk firstly about the financial statements bit, the accounts, and then I'll focus on the value for money bit, and then there's various other requirements that we have. So moving on to page 3, I'm not actually going to go through the headlines in detail because I'm going to go through each of those areas in more detail, but suffice it to say is that the overall conclusion is that we do expect to issue an unqualified opinion on the accounts. That's subject to your approval of the accounts and the letters of representation that we'll come on to.
So an unqualified opinion would be, what does that mean?
It means it's a clean opinion.
It's the good news. It's unqualified.
Exactly.
So
Not qualified in any way.
It's the accounts are fine.
It's the same as a clean opinion. You can't get any cleaner opinion.
Okay, thank you.
So on page 4 we talk a little about that proposed opinion, which is, as we say, unqualified. We are required to talk about some of the more detailed results of the audit. In here we say that we didn't identify any material misstatements. What that means is no big errors or mistakes in the accounts. What we did identify and normally do in all sets of accounts is that, you know, there's some small presentational things that we, if you like, help get the accounts slightly improved. But essentially there's no major adjustments that have arisen as a result of our audit. That's really the key message from page 4. Right, now in doing our audit we have to think of some of the things that we have to focus on more. And these are what we call significant risks to our audit. They're not the same as significant risks to the business or to the organisation. They're just the areas that we have to focus more on our audit. So the audit requirements are that we have to consider that management might override controls. So that means the finance team, you know, not complying with their own controls. Now you might think that you know, there's a very low risk of that, but in fact under the requirement of all auditors, basically we have to consider that as a significant risk. So that a lot of these things are about the standards that are imposed on us to do our job. We can't do just any old audit that we like to do. We have to do it like this. So those risks are things that we actually have to consider. Those ones on page 5. Having said that, we're happy that those risks are dealt with and managed. In addition, on page 6, we identified a further risk that we just focused our work on a bit. And Adrian's just going to say a little bit about it, but the overall point is it's simply a step in our audit. In our audit we have to identify risk, we focus our work, we conclude the work, and the conclusion is it's fine, but we're required to report to you on these steps. This is, if you like, it's trying to be more transparent about the process of the audit that we've actually gone through. And we could have just come with one bit of paper and said it's fine, but here we're trying to explain a bit more about some of the processes we went through. Adrian.
Yes, as John's mentioned about the management overriding controls and fraud, risk of revenue recognition, those are risks that are common to all audits, whether they're in the public sector or the private sector. The item on page 6 about the accounting treatment of the crematorium, we identified that as a risk for our audit, not necessarily for your for the operation of the council, because it's a new matter this year in terms of how it was accounted for, because the crematorium was completed during the year. The way it was accounted for in your accounts changed. Previously it had been treated as an asset under construction, and the issue then was how was it going to be reflected in the balance sheet, either as an operational asset or an investment asset. So the classification was something that we wanted to make sure that was correct. And linked with the classification is the way it was valued. So again, we took a view as to was it classified correctly, was it valued correctly, and the conclusion we came to was that yes, it was. So that's what we've reported to you in here, that we are quite happy with the results from our work. And there's no issues that we need to bring to your attention, no concerns that we need to bring to your attention.
I appreciate that. To a layperson not being quite as precise in their knowledge of audit terminology to see a headline that the accounting treatment of the Rugby and Daventry crematorium is a significant risk and has been identified as a significant risk without further qualifying brackets in audit, purely in audit term brackets or something like that. I would suggest, is not helpful, because very few people are going to frankly get beyond page 6 on a document like this. People are going to read the headlines, and as it stands, it does suggest that there is a significant risk operationally, although we did clarify that's not at all the case. I make the point. I don't know.
No, well, I can totally understand why you make that point. I mean, the other ones, the management override of controls and the fraud risk, those were presented in exactly that way last year, and always have been. So, to some extent, they are exactly the same as that. Those are also things which, as I say, you wouldn't see as a business risk, the management override of controls, but it is an audit risk that we have to consider. So that's why I was saying you have to look at this one to some extent in the same way as those ones. They are all things that we have to do as part of the audit, but they wouldn't be things that you would think were a business risk.
Yes, do other members have any questions on this specific point? When we jointly with Rugby, we built the CRAM. The question is then, having built it, how is it valued in the accounts? Very difficult to value. Our interest in it is a revenue generating entity. It produces us revenue. If it was simply a let building, there's a formula for working out the value based upon the revenue, the rental revenue that is generated. And Audra has taken the view that that is the most appropriate way to value it here. Is that a fair comment?
And we're happy with the way it has been valued. That's the conclusion of going through the process and working out whether that was the right way was a piece of work we had to do.
And without going through that process, there was a possibility of a risk in misdescription or something.
Well, it is a material item in the sense of the value is material to the accounts. Remember, all of this is about the numbers in the accounts, which hardly, not that huge number of people ever spend a huge amount of time pouring through, apart from us. And this is what this is what the audit is about. It is about the accounts and how they're presented and the underlying records. That is the focus of the work.
Yes.
So, for understanding, we jointly with another council built the premise.
Yeah.
There's no money owed on the build, so it's not mortgaged or anything. So that asset is purely an income generating.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So it's all paid for, and it's purely income.
Order's over there.
If I may, I wouldn't get too hung up on whether the asset is paid for, because, for instance, Daventry are debt free and we didn't have to borrow for it.
No, but
Rugby are in a different position.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand.
Yeah, so even if we had borrowed on it, the asset is still worth what the asset is worth. The financing of it is quite a different thing. So I would suggest you don't sort of muddle those things up anyway. You'd still have to show the value of that asset, and this risk was around how we valued that asset. Because there are different ways of valuing assets, and we had to establish the right one for this, and it was based on the the income streams that were generated from that particular.
Whether or not I do it, the fact is the thing is paid for.
It is for Daventry.
Fine, for Daventry, right?
Yes.
If something went terribly wrong with Rugby Borough Council, how would that reflect on us? How would that impact on us?
The very short answer is it wouldn't.
It wouldn't?
No, their financing costs and how they fund this build. The building has been built.
Yeah.
the contractors have been paid. So in terms of the asset that's there, it's there and it's operating as a crematorium, generating the income. So our share of that, is quite separate to, how...
But their creditors, the other district council's creditors, couldn't then attack the building if they defaulted?
No, in terms of the Rugby's borrowing, and we are going down quite a different avenue now, wouldn't be secured on that property.
Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak. I've been a member of your committee. Mine is a purely political statement, Chairman, I think, which you were alluding to. There are things that are in council speak, there are things that are in audit speak, and for the unaware people to see a statement there, and whilst we understand the at risk, it to me politically is alarming. It suggests, and we know wrongly because of the advice from colleagues by the side of me, it is advice that I wouldn't want to be in the public domain in this economic climate, saying that we are at risk.
Yeah, that's another way of approaching. That's another way of stating the point I was making.
Yeah,
that right. But I think we've heard the response and further comments from members.
Well, I think, Chairman, it did just say in the last sentence that in both cases we consider the authorities
yes
to be reasonable.
Yes, the actual treatment is approved, and that's what we would wish to underline in response to any query.
But it's also maybe whether, when we say what significant risk is, whether we can be even more clear about, and we can certainly think about that for next year in terms of how we present it. In some ways I am, delighted to have just a little conversation about an issue, because this is just an example of the many, many things like this that actually constitute the audit, and sometimes I don't think people have any idea what we're spending our time doing. So this is an example.
Chair, would it be an idea to just word it, not in account speak, but in common language speak? Because an unqualified audit, I didn't have a clue what that meant.
The auditors, I'm afraid, they've got to attach certain words, but they could be a glossary.
But it can't be just in plain English. This is a relief thing.
Presumably you could.
Unqualified is about as plain as auditors get.
Chair, if I may, very importantly, when statement of accounts are put together, it is not assumed that anybody can pick them up, read them and understand them, and they are not expected to be written in that way. With statement of accounts and with the language of auditors, it is expected that there is a certain level of understanding. So we are not expected to produce a document that any council taxpayer could pick up and understand. That's accepted in terms of the statutory requirements for producing the statements and the letter. And by not having that common language, for those professionals that do look, that is what they're looking for in terms of comparisons and everything else. That is what you would expect to see.
But this is a public document.
It is, but it's at a level that's expected to say the things that it does.
Shall I continue? You may find it surprising to know that we have tried to work hard to make this as readable and as straightforward as possible, but I think there is that point that Audra's made, that there's only so far you can go in a technical exercise. But moving to page, that is partly why you can ask questions and we can try and answer as simply as possible. On page 7, what we're talking about here is how did the authority go about preparing the accounts, and basically very well, so that we look at how easy was it for us to get stuck into the accounts by the schedules and supporting papers that they prepare that underpin the accounts, because that's what we base our audit on. That's the gist of page 7. We also talk about last year's recommendations, and there's always room for improvement. So here we're talking about progress being made, about explanations supporting the working papers, and there is still always ongoing room for improvement, and that's really what we've said at the bottom of page 7. Page 8, an important thing for us, and hopefully you'll recognise the importance of this, is that we very clearly have to declare our independence and show what process we've gone through. And in fact, there's a whole appendix about our independence from the authority, so that we are not pulled or pushed in any direction in undertaking an audit, and that's obviously crucial for an audit. It also covers the management representations that we'll come on to in the next section, but that's basically asking management to attest to certain things around the transactions are legal and unaffected, or where, if you like, it can't be done by testing. There's some things that we have to basically ask people to say because you can't test it in any other way. Cracking on to page 9, this is where we move on to value for money.
Does that mean that your fees are cheaper this year than last?
They are, actually. But lucky I could answer that. We did have a question on that at the planning meeting. What I would say here is, value for money means a lot of different things to different people. The way that we do it is defined, it was defined by the Audit Commission, who you may know no longer exist, but the criteria that they set down we applied here. And particularly the value for money focuses on looking at financial resilience, so that's how well are you able to cope in the future financially, as well as economy, efficiency and effectiveness. I mean, the short summary is that we've concluded that you have made proper arrangements to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and that's what our opinion will show. So again, if you like, an unqualified opinion in relation to value for money. There are a number of appendices. The only one that I do just want us to touch on briefly is Appendix 1. Adrian was just going to say as simply as he possibly can a couple of the points there.
Right. Audit differences. We need to tell you if we've identified anything through the course of the audit that's material or significant, or that we feel we need to bring to your attention. And under the heading uncorrected audit differences, as a result of the audit, if we find something, we discuss it with management and say, will you amend the accounts? There's nothing that remains uncorrected as a result of the audit, so that's good news. Under the heading corrected audit differences, we've said there are no material misstatements affecting the primary statements. And the primary statements are your income expenditure account, the balance sheet, the cash flow statement, and the movements on reserve statement. Those are the 4 sort of pages that come at the front of the set of accounts. And nothing that was materially affected in any of those statements. The other 2 bullet points on page 10 just refer to one of the changes within the note to property, plant and equipment. Effectively, it was akin to a typographical error rather than anything else. And the second one affected the cash flow statement. It was the group cash flow statement, because this authority has controlling interest in the Daventry Estate Company Limited. So the last few pages in your accounts include the results of that company, and those are the group accounts. And so we just refer to one adjustment that was made on the group cash flow. In private sector, group accounts receive much more prominence. If you pick up any set of published accounts, it'll be of the group, whereas in local government, the main emphasis is on the accounts of the council. And if the council has subsidiary entities that need to be consolidated into group accounts, those are presented at the back as almost as an appendix to the accounts. They're given much less prominence in the public sector. So that's why we just refer to those items in the appendix and not majored on them in our report.
And that really concludes the presentation. Obviously happy to take any more questions.
Thank you. Yes, do members have any other questions? Other than that, we simply receive the report.
I think a comment of excellence on our officers for nothing needed to be corrected, Chairman, if I may say.
Yes, the council gets rather bored with me repeatedly saying that every year, actually. So I thought I might give a rest this year.
We disagree. Wait for full council.
But yes, it is. I mean, as I said earlier, in the report, this gets thinner. The pressures on order increase year on year as the accounts are required to be released earlier and earlier after the year end. And that of itself tests the streamlined production of the figures. And we're delighted to receive the comments that the auditors make that they have an easy-ish job in doing it, and again reflected in the reduction of fee. Good. Moving on. Next item to see the accounts themselves. It is specifically delegated to this committee on behalf of the council to approve the accounts. And it used to be the case that we had a lot of time at full council, but it is very expedient that we are the people asked to approve the accounts by virtue of, ideally, our familiarity with the processes and also the fact that there is a tight timetable for doing this by 30th of September, which is practical for us to do rather than full council order.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Obviously, you've just heard the report on the audit of these accounts, and certainly as the Chief Finance Officer, I'm absolutely delighted with the result of this year's audit. It's the first year that there has been no recommendations made from the audit, and you'll see that even from last year's audit, there was only 2 recommendations which we implemented throughout the year. So for us, it's an improvement. That said, there will always be room for improvement. There will never be a set of statement that is absolutely perfect in every way. The types of figures that we're talking about. And I recognise that some of the areas that KPMG highlighted, some members may look at those figures and think, crikey, I know it's not material in those terms, but they're still enormous figures, and that's the realms that we're in with this. But it's more about the processes and everything else. So when you go through the accounts, you're not actually looking at the figures themselves as to whether we've spent more this year on a particular item or less this year. The governance committee is very much about you're approving the statement of accounts and you're confirming that the processes and procedures are in place, and you can take comfort from KPMG, you can take comfort throughout the year in terms of the audit reports that you get, that this is the culmination of all that work, and that it's done and represents a true and fair view of this authority's financial position. So that's first and foremost, which is why I'm not going to go through line by line the actual statement of accounts themselves in terms of the figures that are in there. It's like I say, you're actually approving that you agree with the processes that have culminated in these results. I'd like to add as well that obviously the timetable that was mentioned before, the statutory deadline for completing the statement of accounts is currently the 30th of June. there's proposals to change that now, and we'll have to have them completed by the 31st of May. Now that's a whole month off our current timetable, or a third if you want to look at it like that. And we self-imposed completing the accounts earlier this year as a start towards that deadline changing. I'm delighted to say we were able to produce them earlier. I'm even more delighted that there were no material misstatements in there, so quality hasn't been lost, and that work will continue through. We'll be working very closely with the auditors, because as much as our timetable has moved, in fact theirs has moved by 2 months. In terms of that 30th of September deadline will actually be the 31st of July. So we'll have to look at all sorts like the committee timetable and things like that. So we're all working together on producing that. A lot of the information that we rely on to produce the statement of accounts comes obviously from lots of the other departments, as well as our own financial systems. So we're working very closely with other departments as well. So, just to run through the report then, like I say, there were no recommendations in this year's report, but section 3.6 confirms that we responded to last year's recommendations. It goes on to explain what each of the statements includes, and like it says in point 4, there's various different parts of the statement of accounts, and whilst it's not explained in the cover report, each of those statements is explained further in the actual statement of accounts. Obviously I'm required to prepare and sign the statement of accounts, and it's explained here that I sign those to say that they're a true and fair view. The committee approves and the chair signs to say that you're happy really with the processes, as I've said. Within that as well, we have to approve the funding of the capital programme. I mentioned this really, that's in there, but really when we set the budgets, this isn't putting forward anything different to what Strategy Group and Full Council in terms of the capital programme and the funding, but we have to formally approve the funding as part of the statement of accounts. Really just to tie up in terms of the statement, I'm delighted really with the end result, and happy to take questions.
Thank you. Yes.
Is it exceptional to get a audit when there are no recommendations? Is that like top of the tree? Is that quite common? Because obviously this is a completely new role, so.
Well, perhaps I'm not the one to answer that. What I would say is it's the first year for Daventry that we've had no recommendations, but I believe we're not alone in that group, and perhaps KPMG.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively rare to have no recommendations. I wouldn't actually say the recommendations are necessarily the big issue. I would focus on the scale of any adjustments, or the number and scale of the adjustments. So in that Appendix 1 we said that there were no adjustments to the important statements, and there were a number of small adjustments, basically small adjustments to the notes.
So adjustments are things that you would observe and say that isn't correct, that needs to be changed.
Exactly. Okay. So to some extent there was a process of working through with the finance team to just try and refine and improve the accounts, and just make, just some things are like a typo, and some things about actually that number didn't come through quite right. So that's the sort of thing, obviously that's miles away from where which I have had in a district council, where the whole underlying system of, supporting the accounts begins to fall apart. You can't trust the financial system, and then you're in a totally different world. And luckily we're very far away from that here.
Okay. Only 12 miles.
Thank you. Any other questions? In which case we can go on to the advice. We've got these resolutions, 5 resolutions on the front page. Proposed funding of 14-15 capital spending programme is agreed. attached statement of accounts is approved. Those that the sponsors to the report are agreed. BFM conclusion is noted, and the letter of representation, which is a letter to Mr. Gorey, is approved. May I have a vote on that? All in favour?
Yes.
Everybody? Unanimous? Thank you very much indeed. Pausing while I sign 2 bits of paper.
Or maybe just a few more.
Yeah.
So this is the I didn't want to have to photocopies on this page, so I will take copies so I can give them
Perhaps we don't do all the conventional things, but there are things that we get together with other auditors, local authorities, and then nationally we have meetings with the government department, and there's things that they're trying to
Just to the community times
Well, it's not due until
as like any other office that's often banking to
Yeah, I think it's
meeting in July.
Quite interesting.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
That's okay.
Of course.
At this point.
I'll let the gentleman out.
Okay, well done. Splendid. Right, item 6, a report by Attorney Gillett. Simon Bovey is going to present this.
Yes, Tony offers his apology, Chairman, can't be here, so I'm covering this one for me. Next we've got some colleagues here, but particularly the auditor, who will be dissatisfied with the internal audit and interest as well. You'll be aware that previously regulations have required an annual review to come to the committee. Well, those regulations have been superseded, but we thought it's still wise to bring a report to committee so you can see what is going on in respect to internal audit and make a judgment as to how effective it is. So we think it's still wise, but there's a change on the horizon. This report is focused on 14-15, and it is the review by Tony Gillett in particular. As I say, though, with input from the outside auditor. You will be aware, as a committee, that internal audit works to the public sector internal audit standards, which are referenced several times in the report. There's documentation you get as a committee to make sure you have suitably guided audit work. And the Council's external auditors, you just heard from, a great deal of reliance on the capability and competence of our internal auditors. And you can take some satisfaction from what's just been presented to you. I suggest quite a lot of satisfaction that overall, in terms of financial arrangements and monitoring of those, because audit do some work on those systems, is all very sound. Obviously, it's key to have that effective service, and it does affect what we put into our annual governance statement, which we're obliged to do as well. And again, I don't think it was highlighted by the auditors in the presentation, but they've confirmed in that letter that our annual governance statement complies with solid SIP for guidance. Those are the national bodies which we, as authorities, are meant to be following, if you like, in terms of setting the standard. So that's also in the KPMG letter. There's an internal audit charter which we're obliged to have. Now that was approved by the committee back in January 2014, so I'm conscious that's before some members were appointed to the committee, but there is a charter in place which is required, and so that's setting out what it is that's expected of internal audit for Daventry District Council. Self-assessment, again referring to those public sector internal audit standards. Self-assessment was required, and that was reported to the committee in June, so not so long ago. And progress on some of the improvements that were identified as part of that self-assessment is in Appendix A. and if need be, we can go into more detail on that, but essentially there's good progress being made. Performance indicators, so on page 135 now, performance indicators, again for 14-15, are appended as well, and again, similarly, good results. And Chairman, you were slightly embarrassed about having to report each year how good we were, but for that year in particular, it was very pleasing to have 90% of our audits full and substantial. Very satisfying for the authority and that's for auditors and for management together, because it's a combined effort. So good results. And also, again, you can take comfort from the external auditors for support for what we do. The quality of the reports is suitable. There's also another dimension here which is about surveys of customers, and officers particularly see value in what audit does for the authority, so contribution to the corporate cause, as it were, making sure we're all on track, being effective. That's reassuring for the officers who've responded to the survey. I'm sure Scott would like more respondents to the survey.
I try and encourage that,
and he does encourage it
Tony as well.
But there have been responses, and so fine, nothing to worry about. And do not read non-responsive being a signal of a problem.
I'm sure if somebody had something to complain about, that's what
it's reversed probably.
I've mentioned about the external auditor role. They've played their role, and basically we get positive comment year on year, which is reassuring. You as a committee, so on page 136, I'm looking at what you as a committee have received over the course of time, and you get regular reports and you see what it does. The chairman and vice chairman also get copies of the individual audits, so again you can see the quality of work and the assessment that's made by our auditors. And generally there's an improving corporate governance in the authority, as was quoted by the chairman, as you can see in there as well. And the chairman also has carried out a good practice self-assessment, and I think take the point that Audra made earlier, improvement is always possible. And one of the things in the authority which I think helps generate the reassurance you get from external auditors and the like is that we don't believe in complacency. There's always room for improvement. You strive for perfection, but you never get there. That's my experience anyway. I mentioned about the future. There are some new regulations now in force from April. And so in terms of review of the effectiveness of internal audit, that's required to be done externally at least once every 5 years. That's a long time. That's a long period. We see fit, and Tony Gill is seeing fit here to suggest that we have one in 2016-17 review. And we also plan to have an interim review before the next scheduled one, 5 years hence. So we'll probably have 3, if you like, in a 5-year period. Because it seems appropriate for a committee like yourselves to be having that reassurance and not wait for a 5-year period. It seems rather poor in my layman's interpretation. But there must be a good reason for it, but I don't know what it is, and maybe Scott will elucidate in due course. But there is a change to the regulations, but we want to do something a bit better than what's minimum required. So we have 2 pieces of advice. In summary, I think the committee in the past, the external auditors, and various checks that management have to comply with indicate that you have got an effective internal audit service. So I leave that with you, Chairman, with the resolution as proposed.
Thank you. Is there anything to add from the right?
Myself, if I can, if I may. Just really to reiterate 2 things really. Because the internal reviews now are not part of the council audit regs, a lot of the elements that are within this internal review in any case they won't be lost. They'll just form part of some of the other internal audit reports that are received by this committee, in particular the annual audit review, which you receive in June, which not only looks at the internal control environment, it also looks at the performance of the internal audit division as well, and includes some of those things that are like, for instance, the performance indicators that are there. The other aspect is around the external review itself. That's our focus now. Like the officers here have said about improvements, we don't rest on our laurels, and although our current improvement plan has only got 2 actions remaining. We are looking to do a full refresh as a bit of a precursor to the external review to see if we can see anything that some angles they may come from to enhance the internal audit service. And we've got the senior internal auditor, the new senior internal auditor that joined us in April. She is a qualified internal auditor, and she is coming from a public sector, a private sector perspective, and she's going to give us a bit of she can give that for myself that bit of playing a bit of a devil's advocate and provide a critical friend review of against the public sector internal standards also. So our focus now is towards those to that external review this time next year, and you will hopefully see a fully refreshed improvement, quality assurance and improvement programme, most likely in April or June next year as part of the annual audit review.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
You must think I'm really stupid. I do.
We welcome all sorts of questions.
These internal audits, these processes, are they all to do with accounts, or are they also to do with functions such as how HR runs, how the front office runs? So is it audit as in generic audit, including financial matters? So it's all processes.
Yeah, I mean, historically, if we go back 5-10 years, a lot of the work that we used to do was around financial, and inherently we did financial work. And yes, that is a big bulk of what we do to support the external audit opinion. But no, we branch out. If you think about the remit of corporate governance, it touches on every aspect and every service.
Right.
So yes, it does. It covers all of your other services. We've done some work this year on housing allocations.
Right.
Well, yes, you could. Yes, we look at just to go run through a list of areas: building control, which you've received some information on, for partnership governance, planning, applications, and income. So yes, it covers the full breadth of services.
And this is an internal team, so technically they are officers that are examining the processes of the
yes, and there's 2 things to that. Simon mentioned the internal audit charter, which one of the key aspects of that is around our independence and trying to demonstrate that independence from management. And I have to demonstrate that at meetings here to try and look at the challenge I'm giving to management, and you can see that as part of those deliberations and the reports I produce.
Can we circulate that? Just remind people of it. It's sometimes it's really pretty.
Yeah, I mean, when we had new members join the committee, I did provide some information as part of that, so I can sort of look to send that round to all members of this committee to give them a bit of a refresh and update from that perspective, if you like. It will certainly help as we go towards the external review and understanding what they may, the sort of terminology that they may use as well, so I can do that, yes.
Yeah, it's quite a unique institution, actually, in local government. As you say, when you try and compare it with a company, you think of the auditor as being someone who comes in after the accounts are produced, just as the external auditors have come in today. And internal audit doesn't really exist very much in a normal corporate atmosphere. But in local government, it's a independent unit available to report direct to members on how management, both theoretically of higher officers and lower officers, management are operating. And it's fairly unique that Scott, as the internal audit manager, is charged with examining effectively the performance against criteria of other managers, including work that's responsibility assignment, for example. And that's unusual. And when Scott talks about reporting on the performance of management and the response of management to the recommendations and the implementation of recommendations by management, he's talking often about people that theoretically in the authority are pay grade above it. So it's quite an unusual situation, but as he's pointed out, it covers the whole breadth of the internal operation of the council.
So bringing it into like my world, my policing world, You look at the strategy and the operational, the tactical deployment.
Very much, and try to do that from a risk perspective, because one of the key things for us as well is what people don't realise is we're not this huge team. There's, including myself, there's only 2.5 full-time equivalents towards doing the internal audit within this authority. And we've been given more resource recently to pick up the counter fraud, and that's one of the items on the agenda. But yeah, we're a very small team, so it's we have to look at our resources a bit in terms of prioritise risk and prioritise that as well. And obviously, we need to react to emerging risks that may come up within the year as well.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman, Scott's quite good value for money as far as internal audit's concerned, because what you save in things later on and the audit fees from the external auditors, it saves us money in the long run in doing the internal audit. Look at problems early, which is a good thing.
Thank you.
Got a good case for a salary increase, Scott.
May I ask a question, Chair?
Of course.
Scott, will you be doing another audit on the building control from later on in the year, or next year?
Yes, I was trying to remember when I last. I think I raise it at this committee in June about building control income. Management have until the end of September to respond to the action on the recommendation that was around that. I've obviously not left it until then. I'm liaising still with order on that, and it's something we've discussed just recently, and we're continuing to press the management within the business team around that, because that is another arrangement that we had temporarily with Rugby Borough Council as well. The update to that will come in the internal audit progress report, which comes to the next committee in January.
I've got a riding crop you can borrow if you want to chase them around a bit fast.
So Chair, just one more. Do you do peer reviews? So do you get a team of, like from another district council come in and do like a peer review on how you operate?
I mean, that's pretty much down to this external review, and that may be one of the options that we could use out of that external review that has to take place once every 5 years. But it's not like we sit in isolation here. We have quite a network between the Midlands internal audit group as well, where we liaise with others on practice within lots of different areas. It might be around audit process, it might be around services that are coming to the fore, it might be risks that are coming to the fore. So there's a network of peers, as it were.
It's sort of an East Midland regional thing.
It's bigger than that actually. East Midlands, it includes a lot of West Midlands. Western Midlands and East Midlands is quite a huge group actually that works well electronically networking rather than meeting together.
Wouldn't this external review be a peer review?
In effect, yes.
So you'd be talking to another authority in the next few months with a view to them?
No, we may look at it. We may look at the options of how that may work out, because in terms of the details for that review will be something that will be agreed with senior management and yourself as well to agree who will sponsor that review. It won't be controlled from I have to detach myself from that. Yes, we need to look at the options that are available.
Right, I mean, you're imposing on yourself quite a tight timetable to have this committee in September 16 receiving the first external review.
They'll likely look to do an external review in July time next year, and the report will be presented to this committee in September. We're very much prepared for it. As you can see from the improvement plan, we've dealt with the first phase of self-assessment. We're now going to look at that critically again to see if we can enhance other aspects of it. And there are always areas, like Audrey says, there's always areas you need to improve on.
And that third eye is lovely sometimes, isn't it? Just coming in, and it's the blatantly obvious sometimes that you miss, isn't it?
That's the beauty of having somebody new come into our team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Professionally qualified.
I think the thing is they last 6 months. They'll be useful for 6 months, and then they become institutionalised.
To some degree.
Sucked and dry whilst it's all.
Right, any further questions? Thank you. Move on to resolutions. 2 proposed resolutions that we consider and endorse the opinion of the effectiveness of the IA in the report, and that the external review is carried out next year to before the next, an internal review is carried out, and before the next external review in 21-22. So we've got the external review next year, another internal, and then external. Agree? Agree. Thank you very much. Colour fraud strategy.
Yes, thank you.
This is yours as well.
Yes, this one's in my name, Chairman. Perhaps more familiar with the anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policies, because we had a report not so long ago on progress on that, and I have overall responsibility for that. So in terms of a new emphasis, a fresh approach in respect of anti-fraud, in this context counter-fraud language, it's appropriate for it to be assigned to myself with the governance, lawfulness, standards, ethics role that I have in the authority. But again, there's clear need for able support from the Office of Chief Finance Officer and internal audit, making sure that we do the right thing. Because a lot of the time, yes, fraud is about the money, but let's not forget the corruption angle as well, where there's some things which perhaps have a non-financial consequence that we have to be ready for as well. So, I mentioned this fresh approach because I wouldn't want you to get an impression that the authority's never looked at fraud before, or counter-fraud, or anti-fraud. Well, of course we have, as I've mentioned. But there is a fresh approach as orchestrated, if you like, through a SIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy body, a voluntary code of practice which we think is appropriate to follow. And on the first page of the report there, you've got the 5, what I would say, sensible principles that you would expect to see in a counter-fraud approach. And that will help give some support to those anti-fraud, bribery, corruption policy documents that I mentioned. So we've got a suite of documents already in place, which we've had to deploy in the past as well. Importantly, in terms of the 4th principle is about resources, and as Scott mentioned, we have appointed an council support to the appointment of a corporate fraud officer position. So it's another CFO, but not that CFO. And again, thinking of what you've just done, the previous item, again, you'll have a responsibility in terms of reviewing the effectiveness of the counter-fraud arrangements, and that's aligned with what's in the Constitution, but we'll have to do perhaps some embellishment of what's in the Constitution just to pick up this point a bit more. But essentially, the committee has a key role. What is in place and what's proposed, and you'll be doing this annually, there's a requirement to do that annually. But it does build on those previous considerations of anti-fraud that we've looked at in the past. It's not on you, as I say, but there's a difference here in the sense of the dedication and focus, which is more helpful. And a word I'll use later about being proactive rather than as reactive, if you like, as before. So there's that dedication and that resource, which is particularly useful for Scott in a small team, as he's illustrated already. But part of the work will be looking at fraud risk profiles. Yes, we've got some risks identified already, but it's essential to update and add to those, and perhaps bring in that new information from the new officer in particular. That might assist as well. And Scott and his team are working hard on that, and Scott can embellish that comment and any other comments as I go through the report. We'll get the ongoing assurance coming through at 4.4. Ongoing insurance will be forwarded through to you, so you've got that sense that things are on the right track. And we want to integrate all this work, obviously, with our existing strategic risks and service risks that are out there, which we look at from other angles. I particularly emphasise that proactive approach, proactive counter-fraud work. I think that's something, given what you hear topically, what you hear in headlines around the country and elsewhere, it needs to be something that we, as an authority, look for, rather than just wait to see. Like that.
Have you got a tactic for that?
This chap will have a tactic. We can come back to that if you wish. Yeah. Actions have been proposed. So Scott's team have proposed actions for the next 18 months, for only a year's worth, because the strategy is fairly new, mature in that sense. Let's see how things pan out a bit, because we might need to adjust as we go along. So an action plan for 18 months has been suggested. But whatever actions we do, the 3 key points are set out in 4.7 about how we go about this work, and that's prevent, detect, and deter. Yeah? And deterrence, obviously, is something which authorities in the past may have been a bit shy of doing, but this authority hasn't been shy of doing, and it's needed to in a particular case in the last year or 18 months, something like that. So we're not shy at doing this work. In 4.9, you've got the summary of what actually has been happening so far. So as I say, it's not something that's completely new. The strategy that's been proposed, which is attached, is also to be presented to strategy group and then for recommendation on to council. Yeah, because the strategy group actually adopts policies and strategies of the council. But you will be asked to endorse it for approval by council in due course. But just so you're aware, it does go through strategy group. So you have that resolution, Chairman. I've done a kind of cover intro, if you like, but Scott can certainly embellish as need be in terms of the counter fraud approach, making use of the input from the counter fraud officer. Thank you.
Yeah, I think rather than taking questions, what I want to do is probably put this into a little bit of context as well. I mean, we've obviously now, previously to this, we've been pretty much doing a bit of firefighting. So investigations come along, we've dealt with them, they've impacted on the internal audit service in terms of the resource that we put to the internal audit side. We acknowledge that, management acknowledge that, this committee did as well, and we put resources towards that. This is the very first strategy that we've really had as an authority. Yes, we've had a policy in the past, and sometimes it's fine to say, oh, you know, we have a zero tolerance for fraud, bribery and corruption. But it's about what you do about it, and it's the actions, it's the action plan which is the key. I think in terms of setting the scene, it's a 3-year strategy which will be approved by council, but the key thing for me is then the actions that come from that. The work programme, we're very much in our infancy in terms of developing that strategy, and certainly the first 12 months of that work programme will be heavily around the prevention and deterrence factor before we develop aspects of the detection. We're obviously picking up doing some marketing campaigns in terms of whistleblowing, doing whistleblowing arrangements, and we will, yes, in between there will be, inevitably be, investigations that arise, and we will deal with them with the limited resource that we do have, and then carry on with that prevention and getting that marketing going. Some of that's internal, some of that's external. Some of the things we're working on at the moment is around enhancing our reporting of frauds. We're developing a fraud app. We've got some funding that we got involved with DCLG for that. So we're developing a lot of those aspects. What's going to take more time is in terms of the deterrent bit, the detection bit. We are already providing a lot more work in terms of developing, as we said in here, the fraud risk register. Yes, we can understand inherently what the risks are, fraud risks are to a local authority of our size and rural nature, and that's reflected within the strategy and comes from some of the research that's been done by some of the national bodies on it. And we will then, from that fraud risk register, that will hone some of our, what I call more getting beneath the skin of services from a fraud perspective, specifically to detect fraud, rather than from in the past where we look at the internal control environment, you know, is it strong? And yes, we will look at fraud as fraud risk as part of an element of that, but the focus now from some of this work from fraud risk will be for looking and trying to detect fraud within the authority and of our customers that interact with us. The other aspect that's going to take a lot longer, I feel, is building up those relationships with us as well. We are obviously going to look to work with neighbouring authorities, and just this past week we have we've attended one of the fraud groups and to try and find out at what stage some of the authorities are within the county, and we are very much ahead of the game, which is good for us, but it's going to take longer to develop some of those relationships. Also, we will look as part of that to work with housing associations. Although we don't, as members will know, we don't have our own housing stock, it is an aspect of social fraud. It does prevent people that go through our housing allocation process, if there is a right to buy fraud within and right to acquire fraud within housing associations. So we're going to look to work with them locally as well. Social fraud will can affect the community in a detrimental way, and although it's of no financial significance for us, we need to influence that and others through services like the housing allocation service. So that will take a lot longer to develop. But the work programme towards the last 6 months of that will look at developing that over in time. But the concentration for us at the moment is reviewing our current arrangements, enhancing them, getting the message out there, trying to encourage reporting and getting that working externally, and then focusing on getting the fraud risks dealt with internally and prioritised as well in terms of getting more ownership of those fraud risks by management at an operational level. That's it in a nutshell, really, trying to say where we're going over the next 18 months.
Quickly on page 165, the national stats there broken down by 8 categories. Of those, obviously, some are just not applicable to us. Which are the ones that you think are most applicable to us?
Well, if you go over the page, that's where it breaks it down a bit more. This obviously places some a bit of context around public sector across the whole of public sector, and then we break it down a little bit more on page 6 in terms of those areas that are more, and you'll see that I've asterisks those that are more pertinent to this authority.
I missed the asterisks. Yeah, quite right. Yes, questions?
But with regards to the business rates fraud, could you expand on that a little bit? I don't know much about. I know about business rates, but the fraud aspect.
No, again, it's something it's highlighted through the national reports, and it's something we need to hone in on ourselves. You'll notice that even TCAF want to try and understand. TCAF are one of the organisations that put together a national survey on that, and you can see that even TCAF are looking to work more closely with the Institute of Revenues Rating and Valuations to better understand this type of fraud, and that's something that we need to spend a bit more time researching and working with the Chief Financial Officer on that as well, with our pooling arrangement and having effects on the quality financially.
It may be pertinent to us because we're going to get some of the business rates eventually.
Have you got any idea on what sort of value we're affected by fraud in this council?
The answer is no, because over a period of time we've had very few audits, a few investigations, fraud investigations.
And I presume they've all been reactive rather than going out with a sting or something.
Sorry. We've never had this resource to be able to do this. It's always been, like I've said before, it's always been about firefighting to some degree. Yeah. Yes, you'll see in section 4.9 of the report some of the things that we've been doing to keep it, from my perspective, it's just been keeping things.
It would be really interesting to understand how these frauds are implemented by the offenders, and then designing countermeasures to go and have a look. As you know, be quite.
I think that's part of the intelligence gathering.
Yes.
Between peers.
Yeah.
And this is an enforcement issue. You know, your intelligence cell that you have. This is, there's quite a few people. That needs to be really tight and secure corridors. Your intelligence needs to be tight, because if you're going to go proactively after some of these things,
a lot of it is about building those relationships up, building up those data sharing protocols as well, which is key. So you're doing things in the right way within the law. We already do, and for a number of years we've participated as an authority in the National Fraud Initiative, which is a huge data matching exercise.
Of course, the danger is that the resources needed to do this right will cost in officers' posts.
Yes, we have to be careful. We have to be proportionate. We have to prioritise.
Because if you're losing, I don't know, £100,000 and it costs you £600,000 to set up all bells and whistles, it's got to be.
But the risk profiling will help.
Risk profiling will help.
We focus.
We have to act for all referrals that come our way, and that's the only thing from my perspective. We might be hoisted by our own petard in terms of, suddenly putting all these avenues out for all referrals and make avenues and channels for reporting fraud, and then not necessarily have the fraud to investigate. But let's just see where we go.
I think you should underestimate the resources required to go proactive.
It's intensive.
Oh yeah.
The most important, one of the recent years, is the single person discount that we did last year. We had good success with that, didn't we?
We did, yeah. If I may, Chair, the important thing from all of this is that you can't eliminate risk. And a lot of the things we do are at a point in time. Using the single person discount as an example, you can do the review and you can find your offenders, if you like, and you can value that. That's as at today's date. It moves on and that particular fraud. So a lot of it is about the education, about the channels, the whistleblowing, and getting people comfortable with doing that. And that's
and looking to use our resources in the best way. I've seen some authorities that have gone out there and done amnesties on particular aspects and said, we'll have a period of amnesty, and then thereafter, if we catch you, we'll take you the full way through the courts, and that has been a good deterrent. You're effectively doing a lot with little in terms of, okay, you might not catch somebody and take them, but you're acting as a deterrent. And maybe, like if we use the example of right to buy and or look at in the press around the housing stock and the landlord situation with subletting of housing stock. How if we can bring some of those houses back into the stock, then that will has a double effect really without any resource.
Interesting.
And not forgetting, of course, that as part of this exercise, there's already lots of good practice that we implement and do.
Well, I should imagine once a fraud process is identified, there must be systems to actually close it down. If it's found in another district council, they say, well, actually somebody is doing A, B, and C, and thereby they're claiming too much or doing this, and this is the way to actually stop it completely. So there must be ways of, quick wins, without prosecuting or without a lot of investigative assets.
Sorry, John, I was just going to add, in terms of deterrent, that publicity at the time.
Yeah.
So if you take, for example, it's not related to fraud, the front page today of the local paper has the prosecution on the health and safety case. That kind of deterrent that people are going to be taken to task, and you will get fined or you will get punished in some way.
Of course, yeah.
It's helpful then for future cases to perhaps decrease.
That's the whole strategic approach. That's what I love about what you're doing. It's not only just education, but it's actually detection. It's actually the sort of tactics that are used to deal with fraud. And you've got to use all strands. You can't. It's not one fits all. Never has been.
No, going back to your original question, it's down to the difficulty in terms of quantifying that as well. How you do it.
Could I just ask you what the abuse of position is about? I see it's the second largest amount on your grid, page 166. The second.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah, abusive position. Yes, good question. What does that mean?
This is a good one, but my understanding of probably abusive position will be more around maybe corruption management. Yeah.
Senior management.
Yeah. Some of the corruption cases, once proved, they're very difficult to prove, but once proved, they can be quite significant.
Does this impact on elected members?
There can be some overlap with lots
So
of
if we were actually involved in like a planning application case, would that come under your remit to investigate?
It would depend on circumstances, because potentially it's the criminal category.
Yes.
Yeah.
Becomes a police matter. So there's a related point in terms of ethics.
Yeah. Well, I think fraud generally is a police matter, isn't it?
Well, there's some elements that we've kicked off. That's the point. Whereas that would be so exposed, I suspect. That have been cases like that in the past. this to be a police-led issue rather than council.
Of course, as part of our fraud response on that as well, we, in dialogue with the monitoring officer, have to make a decision on how far we take an issue, and that sometimes includes informing the police about a matter, and depending on the level of evidence that we've got at that point in time as well.
Audrey, you mentioned unlawful subletting. Would that be relevant for the housing association? As it is for us, is it?
Well, Scott's very good at throwing his voice because I didn't actually.
No,
Somebody did. Scott, was it?
Yeah.
I mentioned that in terms of us trying to work better with the housing associations on that.
It's
we
their
don't hold the
problem,
housing
really.
stock. It's their
Yes.
problem, and it's about,
Yes.
as I understand it, and I think I mentioned in the report, very few housing associations have a dedicated fraud resource.
Yes.
But there is a social. Aspect
Yes,
in
so we could offer that as a resource to them.
potentially, but let's walk before we can run, and that's my main message from this as well.
And importantly, that does impact on us because obviously, if there's subletting going on, that means that house is not available, and we are responsible for homelessness. So if those houses are not available, then it does impact on us.
Yeah, and you'd expect that to be generated, or intelligence it could be generated largely by whistleblowing on this.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, any further questions?
One aspect, totally unrelated, but I suppose you could relate it, Scott, was the publicity that Goodness Foods received with their £40,000 fine, and that DDC officers, health and safety, etc., were involved in that. But that in itself will reverberate around the industry, that DDC officers, DDC have got health and safety officers. Well, yeah, I mean, they work at Durft, we know that, and various other places, but that message all of a sudden goes out there, and the same thing, I believe, will happen with regard to fraud.
It's not that we haven't with housing benefit fraud in the past. It's just that we need to spend a bit more time and resource now thinking about fraud and doing something about it.
Good. Thank you. May we have two further bites of this, of course. It goes to strategy and then full council in due course. For the moment, may we resolve as advised, paragraph 2? Agree? Agree. Thank you very much. We have a annual report from the local government ombudsman. He reviews annually, and the next item. Who's dealing with this?
Good self, Chairman.
Excellent.
Introduce this one, if I may. As you say, the annual letter from the Ombudsman. This is letter 2014-15. A total of 12 complaints that were looked at by the Ombudsman, and 2 were upheld. So in terms of context, 2 out of 12, and in terms of complaints that we get as an authority, we had over 1,300 in a particular year. So those that go all the way, if you like, to the Ombudsman, 12 and 2 were upheld. And the details of the upheld ones are on page 180. Just to give you the illustrations of those. One was a planning matter, about allowing an applicant more time to respond, but no particular problem for the applicant in terms of any injustice. There was no injustice. And then there was a housing-related matter, which is where we were should be quicker in trying to get a response to request for specifications for a job, and that was upheld. But again, there was not a need for a financial remedy, which had been requested by the complainant, and simply an apology was sufficient. So, of the 2 cases that have gone through, frankly, nothing of great consequence for us, which is pleasing to report. As I say, over the year there were 1,300 complaints. There's some comparison on the next paragraphs on page 181 about previous years, etc. So it's been the lowest in 5 years in terms of number of complaints, but frankly, we've always been pretty low. So I don't particularly take much from being lowest or highest, frankly, because it's normally I'd look for a rather big increase in numbers and upheld, then I'll be starting to get worried. that's the summary of the position, Chairman. What we have had in the past, if you recall, through committee is desire to get alignment with our corporate complaints reporting, and that you'll see for the next report, so the 15-16 period.
That'd be good when that
Thank you. Any questions?
Just one check. Even though there was no big consequence with the sanction, where it is upheld, I take it we learn from that. We take that and think, okay, no great consequence, but we have let somebody down here and it is about public service.
Yeah, and you know, to put it in simple terms for that Karen Rivera case, for example, we'll be chasing a lot harder than we did in this case. Yeah,
Brilliant. Thank you.
There's a couple of things. It's important to note to this committee that there's a new feedback policy, as it's now called, rather than complaints. It just specifies complaints, so it'll take into account all types of communications with the authority, and then everybody officers will then look at all of those items of feedback and make appropriate actions according to what those feedback say. And the other thing I think that we should do is, from a corporate governance point of view, is to make sure that all members of SNI see the Ombudsman letter, because it does directly relate to SNI in that letter.
So which letter do you...
The letter that's on page 183, the Chairman, and the Ombudsman states halfway down that supporting local scrutiny and
yes.
a little bit there. And I think that should be brought to SNI members' attention.
Happy to do that. Okay, thank you. Right, subject to those points, and we resolve that we note the annual review of the Ombudsman. Agreed. Thank you very much. No urgent business, so can we just have half a minute on the brew venue? Is it better or worse or no change? Going around the table. You weren't here last time.
No, so I'm coming.
Well, you know, I mean, it's
where were we meeting before? I may have been
upstairs in the main council, which is more formal, which has its pros and cons. You know, we are a.
I think it's harder to hear
Yes.
in the full chamber.
Yes.
It's quite a strange, but in here.
I think it's for the first meetings. The first bit I was.
I'm very sorry I didn't introduce you.
I didn't know where I'd arrived in with all the audit stuff, but as the meeting's gone on, it's been quite enjoyable and quite intimate. It's nice to be able to. There are formalities going through you, but I actually quite like this format. It's just like a general meeting, isn't it? And it's beneficial.
Yeah. Yes. Agreed. Any comments?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've sat in on both, John. I think this is a better form.
Okay. Well, done. We'll come here again if we may.
Yeah.